This is AP YouthNet.
Hello and welcome back to the AP YouthNet talk show, where we look at some of the key issues in youth employment in Asia Pacific today. I'm Sophie Fisher from the International Labour Organization. Today's show will be looking at the issue and the idea of youth guarantees. Might this be useful for tackling youth employment in Asia Pacific? How could they be applied in this region? We also want your views. After you've heard our experts in the studio today, you can continue the debate online. The discussion will be open for your comments for the next 2 weeks. You'll find the discussion on the AP YouthNet website at www.apyouthnet.ilo.org. Today's show and online discussion are part of a series organised jointly by the ILO and the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. With me in the studio today are Sukti Dasgupta, head of the ILO's Regional Economic and Social Analysis Unit, Matthieu Cognac, the ILO's Youth Employment Specialist for Asia Pacific, and joining us via video link are from Auckland, James Sleep of the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, and from Brussels, Jan Kreutz, advisor on social and employment policy, climate change and energy for the Party of European Socialists. And we'll also be hearing from Professor Yuki Honda of the Graduate School of Education at the University of Tokyo in Japan. Thank you all very much for being here today. Youth employment is soaring in many parts of the world. In some countries, it's knocking on for 50%. There's general acceptance that more needs to be done to create timely and sustainable, decent work opportunities for young women and men. But what we need is workable policies and solutions. One idea currently attracting increasing attention is the so-called concept of youth guarantees. Among those putting their weight behind this concept is the ILO's new Director General, Guy Ryder.
I would call for a universal youth guarantee that says that any young person in that situation will be offered either a job experience or further training when they leave school. Let's take this example of a youth guarantee scheme. It actually is a relatively cheap option for governments. Our estimates are that for 0.5% of overall government spending, you can provide a youth guarantee scheme for all young people of this nature. It's not that expensive. You put your hand in your pocket. Past experience in countries like Sweden, countries like Finland, shows that these schemes are successful. They pay for themselves very, very quickly. Look at it as an investment, not a cost. Then you can move in the right direction.
That was Guy Ryder, the ILO's new Director General, speaking to Euronews. Matthieu, let me come to you first. Perhaps you could give us a quick explanation of what exactly are youth guarantees.
Well, yes, as the Director General mentioned, youth guarantees is a mechanism that helps put young people on track of either education or job. It promises them, it gives them a guarantee to have a job or work experience or access to further education or training. And really what it is meant to do is to decrease the level of inactivity for the young people. That is a widely observed phenomena. It helps decrease the so-called NEETs, those who are not in education, nor in employment, and nor in training.
So it's not a job creation scheme as such, it's more focusing on stopping inactivity among young people.
Yes, because at a time when we talk so much about the lost generation, it's important for the young people to be aware of what the world of work is all about at an early age. And the only way to do that is actually to put them in touch with the world of work through some experience by joining firms. And so it is their understanding and their entry into enterprises, and we could maybe explore the possibility into also having youth guarantees applied to the public sector that will give them an optimum chance or better opportunity, let's say, to land a job. Now, not only a job, but of course a decent job. And this is where probably we will have a lot of debate, I hope so, today, because when we talk about adapting youth guarantees from the concept of Europe, where it has worked quite well in countries particularly like Finland or like Sweden, where it really started in the 80s and 90s, and applying that concept to Asia, then we are confronted to issues such as the fact that there is much less access to good skills training organizations, and of course that there is an immense majority of the jobs that are found in the informal sector. and that therefore do not comply with what at the ILO we would consider to be decent jobs.
Okay, you mentioned that these schemes are already running in some countries in Northern Europe. I'm interested in the practicalities of it. So what happens to a young person when perhaps they leave education or their previous training program and then they register with a government employment service, and then how does the Youth Guarantee pick them up?
Well, actually, it helps a lot to give a lot more capacity and notoriety to those public employment centers, which are there to help the young job seekers to find a job. So it helps boost their access, and in a way, it helps reduce that period of time, which is the transition from school to work. Once the people are offered, and it depends on the country, in Finland or in Sweden, from the moment that the person is either unemployed or has finished his studies, there is a period of time that is given for the guarantee to take effect. It could be 4 months or 6 months. Once the person within that time frame has found either a job or a training, the assumption is, yes, you're right, it is not going to create the job, but it is going to add to on the CV of that young person an experience that is badly needed for him or her to land that job.
Jan Kreutz, I'd like to bring you in here. I understand that you're involved in the campaign Your Future is My Future, a European Youth Guarantee Now. What kind of European youth guarantees are you looking for in your context?
Well, we're looking especially at the very successful model that has been applied in Austria, but also in Finland. And there, youth guarantee, basically you have one roof and 4 pillars this roof is standing on. The roof is that you give every young person, once he has become unemployed or has left the education system, that you give him or her a guarantee that after 4 months you receive a new chance. And that new chance is either, in the best case, a decent job, or alternatively a training or an education measure. And so this roof has to be guaranteed. So by say there should be after 4 months, there should be a guarantee that you can move on, that you have a new chance. And from our point of view, the first pillar to make this happen is to create new jobs. We have, especially in Spain and Greece and southern Italy, the problem of more than 50% youth unemployment. And you're not able to give the people a new job unless these jobs exist, of course. So we believe that more must be done to create jobs for young people, and especially decent jobs for young people in particular. And there are in many countries the idea is that you have to give state subventions in order to create these jobs. We leave that up to the national situation, but in some cases this might be necessary. The second element after creating new jobs is, of course, improving the training. We see in many of the countries the youth unemployment is a very big problem, that the training, vocational training, is not working very well. And we believe that the vocational training systems have to be strengthened, especially by strengthening the aspect of dual education. That means that the young person not only learns a new job in school, but also at the workplace, so that there is a balance of learning the job at the workplace, using the practical skills, on the other hand, to learn in school to have the theoretical background for it. And the third pillar from our point of view is also the education system as such. We believe that we have to do much more in Europe to prevent early school leaving, because they are the most likely to suffer from unemployment. But in some countries also to offer more university places for people to the university. And the fourth and very important pillar for us is active labor market policies. You have to be able to pick up the young person where you are. You have to have an individual tailor-made approach where young people receive guidance in schools, but also after they leave school or after they become unemployed, that the labor market services, employers services, really work with them, see what are the skills they are lacking, and look for the right job for this young person.
Jan, thanks very much. I'd like to bring in James in New Zealand now, because the Youth Guarantee Scheme has already made the transition from Europe to Asia, and I think is already up and running in New Zealand, is it not, James? How is the scheme working out there?
Yeah, so New Zealand has an initiative called Youth Guarantee, and the focus is very much on the attainment of qualifications for 16 and 17-year-olds. So in terms of that vision that the Party of European Socialists have about youth guarantee, I mean, the Council of Trade Unions here would say that that's not really in existence in New Zealand. It's something that it's the direction that we think we need to be heading, and that vision needs to encompass work and further education and training. So there's about 3 dimensions to the initiative. So the first is around pathways, and it's about providing clearer pathways and information, well, first of all, clearer information for 16 and 17-year-olds to understand what pathways they can head down, and how to actually get on those pathways and succeed in those pathways. The second is around free placements in tertiary level institutions such as polytechnics and private training establishments for 16 and 17-year-olds. There's very limited, quite limited placements. There's about, I think the goal is to have about 12,000 of those placements for young people by 2014. And we're always reminding the government that there's 84,000 young people in New Zealand who are in the NEET bracket category. And so a lot more needs to be done in that area. So the focus is very much on 16 and 17-year-olds, and the initiative doesn't look wider at other young people who are affected by youth unemployment.
And is it possible to tell yet what the longer term effects are, what the retention rate for these young people is in the work?
So it's very much, it's a new initiative. So the focus has been on placements within education establishments. So there simply isn't the information to suggest that those people are actually transitioning through to work in the first place. I'm sure many of them are. So that's a very interesting question, actually.
And the scheme, as it's currently constituted in New Zealand, is for new labour market entrants. What about young people who have been unemployed for a longer period? Is there any intention to expand it to them?
So outside of the Youth Guarantee Initiative is what it's called. There are a number of policies in place, programs in place to provide job placements for young people in work, further education, etc. It's very limited. It's under-resourced. So one example is an initiative called Job Streams, and that provides employers with subsidised placements for young people, and it has a training component in there. But again, that's very limited, and it doesn't actually address the bigger picture of 84,000 young people out of work, education, and training. So there are initiatives in place. They're under-resourced, and I think that what could be beneficial is having a bigger kind of picture vision around Youth Guarantee and fitting and coordinating these initiatives within that vision.
Thanks, James. Now, I know that there's also already interest in youth guarantees in Japan. And at this point, I think we should hear from Professor Yuki Honda, who is a youth employment expert from Tokyo University.
I am Yuki Honda, professor at the Graduate School of Education, the University of Tokyo. Thank you very much for this opportunity for me to provide some comments on the Youth Guarantee Scheme. I find the initiative very attractive. Given the Japanese context, I would like to ask 6 questions about youth guarantees. The first question is about how to ensure that we have enough training and job places for a youth guarantee. Local municipalities and private sector companies will be required to create job opportunities and opportunities for skills training. But my concern is that these requirements may add burdens for them. The second question concerns the quality of such opportunities, which I find to be a crucial issue. Suppose that the space for youth guarantee is provided. How can we guarantee the quality of these opportunities? It will be quite strenuous to monitor and check if these opportunities actually do offer valuable support. The third question is whether Japanese private companies value youth guarantee experiences highly enough. What is characteristics about employment at Japanese companies is its membership-based recruiting and employment. Therefore, whether they will recognize the youth guarantee experience or not is a significant issue and concern. My fourth point is on the fact that the Youth Guarantee Scheme does not require the youth any financial commitment, which may lead to a moral hazard among young people. Fifthly, if the government provides subsidies to private companies which offer youth guarantee opportunities, some private companies may take the advantage of the scheme because they could have cheap labor. The sixth and most significant concern is on how we can ensure to allocate sufficient financial resources for such a scheme in an aging society like Japan.
That was Professor Yuki Honda of the University of Tokyo in Japan. Her questions are very practical. how to ensure that there's enough training and job places, and how will the current systems cope with the burden of administering this, the issue of cost, the question of whether private employers would value a youth guarantee scheme or whether they will simply treat it as cheap labour. Is there an issue of moral hazard? Should the scheme require a commitment from young people? And overall, and most importantly perhaps, can countries pay for it, and if so, how? I'd like to start with you, Sukti. We've heard from two of Asia's richest countries, Japan and New Zealand. More generally for the region of Asia Pacific, what do you think the challenges and opportunities are for a policy such as youth guarantees?
At a conceptual level, I think it is extremely relevant to have a youth employment guarantee even for the Asia Pacific region, for the developing Asian region. What I'm trying to say is that at the conceptual level, it's equally relevant for developing Asia as it is for developed part of Asia or for the industrialized countries. The challenge, of course, will be how you design a youth employment guarantee that captures the realities of developing Asia, and how do you implement such a system, given that the characteristics of youth employment in Asia, developing Asia, not exactly the same as what you see in other countries. First and foremost, I think one needs to bear in mind that in developing Asia, in addition to those who are unemployed, you have a large number of young people who are in vulnerable jobs, who are working, who are not in education, who are working, but maybe part-time, vulnerable, in precarious conditions. So the question is not only of getting work, but of getting quality work.
There's also an issue, isn't there, of simply the practicalities. I mean, both Japan and New Zealand have sophisticated labour market systems. Absolutely. Whereby you can identify young people coming out of education or training. Mm-hmm. You can pick them up and you can funnel them through. And that's one aspect. And then the second aspect is that you have basic infrastructure, hard infrastructure systems such as transport, so they can get from where they live to where their youth guarantee job or their youth guarantee training might actually be. A lot of the countries in Asia Pacific have neither of these hard or soft infrastructure systems. Absolutely,
because the main difference between developing Asia and other parts of Asia or the industrialized world is that we don't have well-functioning labor market institutions. For example, the Public Employment Service, which is the main institution which is used in the youth employment guarantee in Sweden or Finland, or perhaps even in New Zealand and Japan if it works there, requires that there is a functioning public employment system that works. Whereas in most of developing Asia, even if we have public employment services, they don't work very well, and they have a long way to go. But the good news is that most developing Asian countries have now started investing in public service systems. So the future may not be that bleak. But secondly, there's also an issue of poor infrastructure in general. So it's not so easy, first and foremost, to identify those who need to be part of the system.
And what about the cost, the financial cost of this?
Well, as Mr. Guy Ryder mentioned in his intervention, most of the arithmetic show that it's only about 0.5% of GDP that's required for a youth employment guarantee. Now, we'll have to work out the maths for developing Asia. We don't know. We have to do that research and come to some kind of estimate. But I would think that it wouldn't be that high. But the challenge really would be in having in place proper institutions that would implement it, and also making sure that a youth employment guarantee in developing Asia is part of the overall development agenda. So it's not a standalone issue, because the problem is not so much of young people being out of work, but of young people not having the right kind of education to even access training systems.
Matthieu, I can see you nodding. So it's not so much the lack of work, it's back to the quality issue and whether that work is actually decent and taking them anywhere.
Yeah, sure. Of course, it's about the decency of the work that is being provided, but that is the case for whichever system. And if we talk about internship or apprenticeship programs, there will be that question that will be raised. I think the more fundamental issue and the reason why it's particularly interesting to talk about youth guarantees today is that it should be seen as a right. This is an instrument that differs from the apprenticeship systems that we all know and which we very much encourage. But it differs from them in the sense that it is something that is perceived as a right. It should be the right of every young person to have access to either education or a job. And along with it, of course, will then come the issue of making sure that the jobs they are assigned to refer to decent jobs, jobs that are facilitating a discussion between the worker, the employer, that don't discriminate, and so on and so forth. But it's not that it's a different issue. It's an issue that needs to be run in parallel. And yes, probably there should be some regulatory types of bodies to come and make sure that the decency of the job is applicable as the young people are offered those jobs. But again, it's the focus on seeing youth guarantees as a rights-based instrument that differs from anything else that has been seen in Asia and the Pacific in the past. And this is maybe also what has made it such a success in countries like Finland or Sweden from the early 80s or 90s.
Sukti, another point I wanted to raise with you is that the backbone of many of the economies of Asia are small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. It's one of the region's greatest strengths, their vibrancy, their flexibility, their ability to grow. Now, from what we've been hearing about the European schemes, these are focused very much around large institutions, governments and big employers. Do you think there's a way that SMEs in Asia could be harnessed to make this, to give a strength to the scheme in the Asian perspective?
Yeah, I think you've hit upon a very important point, because in the Asia-Pacific case, for developing Asia, it's not so much wage employment as self-employment. And if there is a youth employment guarantee scheme, and there should be, I completely support it, and I do think there should be a rights-based approach to youth employment in developing Asia as well. I think the avenues one would need to explore is how, for example, to make credit available to young entrepreneurs. How to make sure that they have the necessary mentorship, they have the market linkages to set up their business and to be profitable. But along with that, I think one may also need to explore, for example, the existing national rural employment kind of schemes that you have in India, which is also a rights-based approach, but those will cater only to the needs of rural youth who are less skilled. They would not really cater to the needs of well-educated young people. So I think for developing Asia, that when we design youth employment guarantee schemes, a combination of different kinds of interventions would be required.
Right. The other question I wanted to raise with you, since it was raised by Professor Honda in Japan, is the question she raised about moral hazard, whereby requiring no input, financial or otherwise, from young people, simply handing them an opportunity on a plate. Do you think that's an issue in Asia Pacific?
I think when it comes to ensuring that there is a financial commitment from young people, there is a problem in developing Asia, simply because if you're talking about a universal scheme, then just by making financial commitment part of it, you will, not have many young people participate because they wouldn't have the ability to do so. But on the other hand, perhaps there could be other kinds of commitments that, if you undergo a training, you're required to do X, Y, or Z, you're required to work for X number of years, that you have to work in the particular field in which you have taken a training in. So the moral hazard can be addressed in other ways, but not necessarily through a financial contribution.
And Matthieu, let me bring you back in here. In Europe, these are schemes run by central government. But in Asia, economic and social conditions are much more varied, not just between countries, but within countries themselves, which could be a barrier for some countries trying to introduce these schemes. But I wonder whether you think that they might work perhaps in a regional or even a sub-regional context, perhaps in one province of a country or one sector of an economy, at a much smaller level, perhaps as a pilot.
Well, for sure, it should start as a pilot, because the youth guarantees, as they have been depicted in Europe or as they are just beginning now in New Zealand, haven't been tested out in our region of Asia and the Pacific. So definitely it's something that should start at a local level, at the provincial level, perhaps.
Sukti, from the economist perspective, do you think that might be the way to go?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think we should do, first of all, a good design, then an implementing strategy, and then it should be piloted in specific, districts even, or states in countries before you go at the national level.
So perhaps smaller areas where they do have the hard and soft infrastructure, and perhaps they have a smaller youth employment issue to deal with, one that they can actually grapple with.
Absolutely.
Matthieu.
No, I mean, I just wanted to come back 1 second to your question about the moral hazard or the financial hazard that you raised, because I mean, we should not forget that the ones who are in a tough situation today are the young people. So it's not a question of saying whether or not they would be in a position to financially commit themselves further. They are the ones who are unemployed 3 times or up to 6 times more than the adults in this region. They are the ones who need extra focus and extra attention. And if we talk about commitment, they are the ones who, in a system like this one of youth guarantees, will need to commit themselves to accepting the jobs or the educational opportunities that will be provided to them following that period of time that we discussed before. So I'm not sure that the discussion today is going in the right way if we go on the side of talking about the financial commitment that should be made from the young people. I think their commitment is there anyhow, and that the solutions need to be found for them to enter into the world of work in the best possible ways.
Matthieu, thank you very much. And I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank our contributors, Matthieu Cognac, the ILO's Youth Employment Specialist for Asia Pacific, Sukti Dasgupta, who's head of the ILO's Regional Economic and Social Analysis Unit, James Sleep from the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, and Jan Kreutz, who is advisor on social and economic policy, climate change and energy from the Party of European Socialists. And finally, Professor Yuki Honda from Tokyo University. And thanks to you all very much for joining us. Please let us know your thoughts on youth guarantee schemes by joining our online discussion. Do you think they're suitable for Asia Pacific? Would youth guarantees perhaps have helped you find a better job? You'll find the discussion at APYouthNet.ilo.org. Once again, thank you very much for joining us and see you next time.
This has been an AP YouthNet production.